All right. Hey, everybody. Good morning. Shabbat Shalom. It is Friday morning, August the 23rd, 2024. And we're continuing in Revelation this morning. We're going to be looking at Revelation. I keep doing that. I don't like hearing my own voice. And I have that open so I can see the chat. Anyway, so we're going to be looking at Revelation 21, verses 15 through 17. And the title this morning is The Sanctuary City. And people talk about sanctuary cities and yada, yada. This is the city that is the sanctuary. This is the dwelling place of God. So beginning in verse 1, let's recap. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. I also saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. I also heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the dwelling of God is among men, and he shall tabernacle among them. They shall be his people, and God himself shall be among them and be their God. He shall wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Nor shall there be mourning or crying or pain any longer, for the former things have passed away." And the one seated upon the throne said, "Behold, I am making all things new." And then he said, "Write, for these words are trustworthy and true." Then he said to me, "It is done," or it has become. These things are done. The city is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the beginning and the goal. To the thirsty I will freely give from the spring of the water of life. The one who overcomes will inherit these things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. But for the cowardly, for the timid, for those, and this is really of those who don't persevere, really is the image in cowardly there, and the faithless, and the detestable, and the murderers, and sexually immoral, and sorcerers, and idolaters, and all liars, their portion, their lot, is in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Then came one of the seven angels, holding the seven bowls full of the seven final plagues. And he spoke with me, saying, "Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." So he saw the bride, he saw the new Jerusalem coming down. It's like a bride coming down the aisle, and he says, "Come, let's get a closer look." Verse 10, then he carried me away in the spirit, in the Ruach, to a great and high mountain. And he showed me the holy city Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God. I'm sorry, apparently there was a big crackle. I don't know what that was. And he showed me the holy city Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God, verse 11. Her radiance like a most precious stone, like a jasper, sparkling like crystal. The couple of things here, as the city is coming down like the bride, again, the question that we're looking at is, this is a physical city, it seems, and yet there's so much symbolism in the book of Revelation that the Lord uses things to describe what he really values. And so the question is does this represent an actual physical city place, or does it represent the people of God? And I don't really think there's a need to make a choice. I think it is both, which we've talked about in these days. And I think we will see that with greater clarity as we go through the description of the city. One thing I didn't mention yesterday, because we're going to look more at these in the coming week, we'll see more of these precious stones that are mentioned. So here, a most precious stone like jasper, sparkling like crystal. And so didn't really get into that, and not going to get into it much today, more so when we get to verse 18, it's mentioned again. But we did see back in Revelation chapter 4, verse 3, when in the Spirit John was taken into the throne room of God, and he described at least he gives us imagery of what he experienced. He says the one who was seated, and the one who was seated was like jasper and carnelian in appearance, and a rainbow around the throne like an emerald in appearance. And so those stones that are mentioned we saw that a key description of the one upon the throne, a key description of his glory is like jasper, which is this. It actually can be, because when you're dealing with ancient descriptions of stones, it can be possibly like a diamond as well. But there's a clarity to it. And so what you see is that the glory of the city is the glory of God, right? The one seated upon the throne was like jasper. And here, this city comes down. He brought it close, having the glory of God, her radiance, her brilliance, her illumination of the city being like a most precious stone, like jasper, sparkling like crystal. So the experience that John had when he saw the one seated upon the throne is the experience, is what he sees and what he's describing with the throne, or with the city as it comes down. Verse 12, she had a great high wall with 12 gates, and above the gates 12 angels. On the gates were inscribed the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel, the sons of Israel. There are 3 gates on the east, 3 gates on the north, 3 gates on the south, 3 gates on the west. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them the 12 names of the 12 apostles or emissaries of the Lamb. Now, what's interesting is really, this is the first, I didn't realize this, but this is really the first occurrence of the word apostle, apostolos, referring to the 12 in any of John's writings. He uses the phrase the 12 on 3 occasions at the end of John chapter 6, John 6, 67 through 71. He uses the phrase the 12, but calling them the apostles has not been his typical language. And so here, which was just interesting, but here they're the 12 emissaries, the 12 apostles this is the foundations. He sees the foundations, and of course this represents the fullness of the new covenant believing community, the kehilah, the building of God founded on the apostles and the prophets, with Messiah himself as cornerstone, as we read about in Ephesians and in 1 Corinthians 3, right? And so every tribe, every tongue, and every nation is now is here. But the gates are, we see the fullness. We talked about even the 2 witnesses. Who were the 2 witnesses? And they're reflective of the fullness of the witness of God's covenant through the ages of Israel, of the 12 tribes of Israel, and then the fullness of that in the foundation stones here of the wall, all being reflected in this, in the walls of the city, the walls and the gates. Verse 15 we come to today. The angel speaking with me had a gold measuring rod to measure the city and its gates and walls. So now we come to this. The angel has this measuring staff, this measuring scepter of gold, and he's going to measure the city and its gates and its walls. And we have encountered measuring at different points in the prophets, specifically regarding Jerusalem and prophetically regarding Jerusalem. You'll remember back in Zechariah chapter 2, we read in Zechariah 2:5, he had this vision of this man. He said, I lifted up my eyes, and behold, I saw a man with a measuring line in his hand. And so the man has a cord of measuring here, a rope of measuring here. And the word that's used in Zechariah for a rope is the word chevel, which is used in several places in the Hebrew Scriptures to refer to inheritance. I'll just give you one occasion where we see that. Deuteronomy 32, verses 7 through 9 says, remember the days of antiquity, understand the years across generations. Ask your father, and he will tell you, your elders, and they will say to you, when the Most High gave nations their heritage, when he separated the sons of men, he set boundaries for the people by the number of the children of Israel. But Adonai's portion is his people. Jacob is the chevel, the share of his inheritance. Jacob is the cord, the rope of his inheritance. This is the measure. It's this meaning kind of where it's a rope of measurement. The Lord had put his boundaries around. This is my inheritance, and the portioning with Jerusalem as its center. So we see here, I lift my eyes, behold, I saw a man with a measuring line. And then in verse 6, I asked, where are you going? He answered me, to measure Jerusalem, to see how wide and how long it is. Right? So Zechariah doesn't say, who are you? He doesn't ask, what are you doing? The question is, where are you going? And the surveyor answers, the guy with the measuring line says, I'm going to measure Jerusalem. I'm going to see about its width and its length. Right? So this measuring line is a symbol of preparation for the rebuilding and the restoring of Jerusalem, restoring of the temple, ultimately in the Messianic kingdom, in the fullness of God's kingdom, right? So he's measuring in order to build, right? We come to find as we read on, he's measuring in order to build, in order to expand. He actually goes on to say, look, it's going to be a city that's filled to the point where as though it has no walls. Like it has no walls. And then says the Lord himself will be the wall around the city. And not to give it away, but we'll talk about it again when we get there. But what's exciting is that when you later see the walls, the appearance of the walls, what is the appearance of the walls? The appearance of the walls is like jasper. Right? So the glory of God is the reflection of the city. The glory of God is like what you see with the walls. And the Lord said that he himself would be like a wall of fire around Jerusalem. And that's what you see, that it's pointing to this. And so the measuring of Jerusalem is a graphic way that anticipates, the filling out of these dimensions, a rebuilt city with a restored temple. And that's what we see in Ezekiel. Ezekiel has this vision, and he has it. So the man in Zechariah is going out to measure for Jerusalem. Ezekiel had a vision of a city that was being constructed. Right? And we mentioned this yesterday. The man who was in linen had a measuring rod, and the measurements. In fact, when you go through Ezekiel chapters 40, 41, 42, this is a significant portion. It's a lot of measuring, a lot of detail there. He says in Ezekiel 40, though, verses 2 and 3, in visions, God brought me to the land of Israel and set me down upon a very high mountain. Right? So right now, John's been brought to a very high mountain. And so centuries earlier, God brought Ezekiel in visions and set him down on this very high mountain. On it, toward the south, was something like the construction, the building of a city. Right? It's a city that's being prepared, a city that's being built. He brought me there, and behold, there was a man whose appearance was like bronze. He had a linen cord in his hand and a measuring rod. He was standing in the gateway. He himself stood in the gateway, so almost as though he himself is the gateway. And then over the next chapters, he measures the gates, he measures the walls, he measures the inner court and the outer court, and he's measuring from the north and the south, and from the east and the north and the south and the west. And these are the way things are being measured. And after all of these measurements are given, we come in Ezekiel 43 to verse 1. It says, then he led me to the gate looking east. And behold, the glory of the God of Israel was coming from the east. Remember, Ezekiel had a vision of the glory of God departing from the temple, back in Ezekiel, I believe, chapter 10. So now, the glory of God is returning. His voice was like the sound of many waters, The earth was radiant with his glory. He continues, look at verse 4. Then the glory of Adonai came into the house by way of the gate facing the east. The Ruach, the Spirit, took me up and brought me into the inner court. Then behold, the glory of Adonai filled the house. Now, as we continue to read in Ezekiel 43 here, reflecting upon all the things that we're seeing now through the revelation that God is giving John, we come to understand that what Ezekiel was being given a vision of is this new Jerusalem, is this point, right? Because look at verse 6. He says, Then I heard someone speaking to me from the house while a man was standing beside me. He said to me, Son of man, this is the place of my throne, the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the children of Israel forever. The house of Israel will no longer defile my holy name, neither they nor their kings, by their prostitution or by the corpses of their kings in their high places, right? So when we think about what's happened to Babylon, to the great prostitute, and how she defiled, how the kings of the earth and so many, they defiled themselves with her, but now she's gone, and all of that is gone. No longer is that there. He says, whenever they set their threshold, verse 8, next to my threshold, and their doorpost next to my doorpost, with only a wall between me and them, they defiled my holy name by their abominations they committed. So I have finished them off in my fury. Right? So this is after the completion of the wrath of God. He says, now, let them put away their prostitution and the corpses of their kings far from me. Then I will dwell among them forever. Right? So we had these measurements being given, and of this, of a city that was being constructed, and this vision of the glory of God returning and dwelling amongst his people. After this, everything had been purified, and all of this was done. And of course, we do remember too that earlier in Revelation, in just before we meet the two witnesses in Revelation 11, that John was actually, if you recall, instructed to do some measuring. Revelation 11:1. Then a measuring rod like a staff was given to me, saying, Get up and measure the temple of God and the altar, and count those worshiping in it. And again, the word count there is not, it's inserted, but it says measure the temple of God and those worshiping in it. So it doesn't have the word count, but it can be implied but the word measure is what applies to both the temple and the worshipers. So measure the temple, measure the altar, measure the worshipers. What would the command to measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship in it mean? Typically when John, if you read in the Gospel of John, when you speak of the temple, he would use the Greek word hieron, which is the term he uses for the temple complex. And only one place does he use the word naos, which is the word that's used here in Revelation 11, and he uses it. It's used 3 times in the same passage when Yeshua is referring to the temple of his body. John chapter 2, verse 19, it says, "Destroy this naon, destroy this temple." Yeshua answered them, "And in 3 days I will raise it up." The Judean leaders said to him, 46 years this temple, this naos, was being built, and you will raise it up in 3 days? But he was talking about the naos, the nau of his body. And so the temple here, measure the temple, measure the altar, measure the people in it. And here and in Ezekiel's vision, right, it points to something beyond this earthly physical temple that we would be envisioning, but it points more to the people of God. And again, this city is reflective of the people of God. And we will see that even the fact that its walls, that its gates are identified by the 12, we've got the 12s that are pointing to God's people, to the tribes, to the apostles, to the fullness of that relationship of his covenant people. That is the definition. This city is the people, and the people are the city. And again, in the idea that when you read in the New Covenant scriptures, you are the believing community, you are the temple. Jews and Gentiles together. You are the dwelling place of God. And so he says, again, verse 15, then the angel speaking with me had a gold measuring rod to measure the city and its gates and its walls. Verse 16, the city is laid out as a square. Literally it says, and the four corners, the city, four corners were laid out. So, and its length the same as its width. So that's how we know it's a square. The city's laid out four corners with its length the same as its width. He measured the city with the rod, 12,000 stadia. Its length and width and height are equal. So 12,000 stadia is the number that's given to us. Now again, we've seen here this number 12 is reflective of God's people, including tribes, the sons of Israel, including the apostles. The number 12,000 was, we saw for those who were sealed from the 12 tribes of Israel, 12,000 from each tribe. Remember 12,000, and so you have the 144,000. And so the 12,000, each tribe now is used for the dimensions of the New Jerusalem. And so now in real measurement, a stadion, so stadia is plural, stadion was approximately 1/8 of a mile. So this would be 1,500 miles. So the length was 1,500 miles. The width was 1,500 miles. Right? This is 144 million square stadia. Right? That's a number that's 1,000 times 144,000. 1,000 times what we read in Revelation 7. This place is immense, right? So it's laid out. The city's laid out in a quadrilateral plane. It's a square. But it's not just a square. What does it say at the end? Its length and its width and its height are equal, right? So this is a cube, right? 1,500 miles by 1,500 miles by 1,500 miles. Miles, right? This is a cube. And you go, well, okay, what's the deal there? Well, the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctuary of the temple, was a cube. 1 Kings 6:19 and 20. He prepared an inner sanctuary within the house to set there the ark of the covenant of Adonai. The inner sanctuary was 20 cubits in length, 20 cubits in breadth, and 20 cubits in height. He overlaid it with pure gold and overlaid the cedar altar. So what you have, right? Even when you read in Exodus, I believe 28, it's a little harder. I didn't put it in here because it's a little harder to show because of the way the details are laid out. But in Exodus 28, when it's talking about the tabernacle, the tent, the most holy place in the tabernacle was a cube as well. So here you have this is where the writer of Hebrews points to the tabernacle, points to that place and says, listen, this was a parable, and this was and he talks about it almost like a model. Uses the language of it was a model. We've got on a small scale here of the greater thing. And so now what you see is this whole city is the sanctuary. This whole city is the Holy of Holies, right? The dwelling of God is among men. I will tabernacle with them. I will be in their midst. His glory is in the midst. That's why there's no temple in the city, because the city is the sanctuary. The city is the innermost sanctum of the temple. God is there. There's no curtain. There's no division. He is there in all of his glory. The fullness, he is surrounding it like a wall of fire. The glory within it, the glory around it. This is the sanctuary city. This is on a scale that is, again, the language that's given to us is given to us in terms of measurements that would communicate to us. This place is massive. But remember what the Lord says, where he says, through the prophet, he goes, where are you going through Isaiah? He says, what place are you going to build that can contain me? Even the highest heavens, the heavens of the heavens can't contain him. So the dimensions that are given here are extraordinary dimensions in our understanding. And we read on in verse 17, he says, he also measured its wall, 144 cubits. So we move from stadia to cubits, which is because we're dealing with the measuring of the wall. And some commentators are like, well, is it the width of the wall, how wide the wall? When you read about the walls of Jericho, you could ride on top of them. Is it the height of the wall? 144 cubits. Each cubit would have been about 1.5 feet. And so this would be around it's like 220 feet. So that's it'd be like a wall that's 22 stories high and 22 stories thick. See, I think it's when he just says measure the wall. He also measured its wall, 144 cubits by human measurement, which is also an angel's measurement, and that's how it's translated here. But when you read about the measurements in Ezekiel, when the man with the measuring rod there measures the walls, it tells us specifically there that he measured both the thickness and the height of the walls. And so what you have there is, and so it wouldn't to suggest that the measurement here is the width and the height. Anyway, either way, place is big, right? And then it says the measurement is by human measure as a person, or rather, and it could be translated this as a person, or rather an angel measures things. And so, it's funny. I read things. People are like, relative to the size, 220 feet isn't that high, and yada yada yada, and they're trying to understand it all in terms of literal. How would this work? Or whatever, architecturally. Anyway, it's big. It's big, and the numbers here are pointing to something that has to do with people. We're getting 144, 12,000 by 12,000 by 12,000. We're getting dimensions that point to a fullness with the glory of God in our midst. That there is a glory here that John is experiencing, that God is doing, that he's, and everything is on. When we begin to see the descriptions of the walls, and the different stones and so forth, all of those things are reflective of, symbolic of God's people and of him in our midst and of his glory in our midst. And even, when you look at the temple that we just read about in First Kings chapter 6, in the ark, everything was overlaid with gold. Well, here we'll come to find that this is pure gold. Like whatever we value here is just everything here is just gold plated. Everything here is just a picture. It's just a deposit that says, hold on, just wait a second. And so that's where the Holy Spirit dwells within us as a deposit for what will be when we will be in the inner sanctuary, in a city that is the most holy place, in the city that is the sanctuary, oh God, where his glory is in its fullness, right? And no more tears, no more weeping. He will wipe away every tear, no more death, no more mourning, right? So then the call becomes to persevere. The call becomes to hold on, to keep your eyes on him. Keep your eyes, your hope set on him. Don't be distracted by the momentary, right? But have a heart that's set on the eternal. Amen. All right. Well, let me just say a quick hello to everybody as we get ready for Shabbat. Good morning to Pat and Lori. Good morning to Kathleen and to Joshua. It's good to see you guys, and to Mignon and Rashad and Jenny and the Compost family. And good morning to Ron and Amy. Hope you guys are doing well. And to Steve and Joshua, and good morning to Kelly and Melody Woods and Kelly Kenfield and Richard and Ellen and Elizabeth and Jesse and Lauren and Mike and David and Levi and Valor and Haven and Everett and Felix. And good morning to Pastor and Sister Martinez. Love you. Oh, and good morning to Sonia and Margarita and Sonia Tkach and Eileen, and to Jimmy and Misty and my sister Maria. I love you, sis. And to Jason and Ashley and Ami and Carol and Charlene and Sharon and Deborah, and to everybody, good morning. If I missed anybody, my apologies. All right, well, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom, Shabbat shalom. Have a beautiful day.